It's 101 on my end, so.
It's
All
still
right,
3 o'clock
it's
over
working.
here.
All right. So I'm good.
You're good.
We should be
All right.
live.
Well, it hasn't. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of GT Insider. This is a place where you can come join us for quick insight into all things gaming and maybe hear something that will enhance your gaming tribe experience. As always, everything on this show is the opinion of the host and not necessarily the opinion of Gaming Tribe or Mass Luminosity. Today we have a special episode as we are welcoming our first guest host that is not a Gaming Tribe member. Everyone welcome Randy Johns to the show. He is the lead developer of Animus Interactive.
Avalon Lords is
Sorry,
the
Oh,
Avalon Lords. I
yeah.
typed
that's
Animus
the
full
title.
time.
Interactive is the company.
Okay. So today we're going to do things a bit differently. Instead of having a round robin of topics, we're going to take this time to get to know more about Randy, Avalon Lords, and Animus Interactive. We will start with our questions and then open it up for the audience. So if you have questions, think about them and put them in the chat, and we will collect them up now. Tim, let's start with your questions.
Awesome. Randy, I just kind of wanted to start out a little bit and ask you to give kind of just a slight brief history of what you think is important to an audience of gamers.
I would think what's most important to an audience of gamers. I think what's most important in a game is gameplay. Everyone is always. I mean, I'm a graphics programmer and love to write graphics engines. But I think what matters most is gameplay. If the game is fun, that's what matters. Graphics are second. Other than that, I think it's such a big topic, just creating games in general, that it'd be very difficult to answer that question.
Awesome. Sweet. I'm going to ask Joe to give you one of his questions
You want to
related
rotate
to,
around like that?
yeah, just go a little bit around because I have everyone's questions here. So, uh,
Okay.
Joe has a very interesting question related to some of the companies that you may have worked with.
Oh
Great.
yeah. Um, so which company just in general was the most enjoyable to work for, especially from the aspect of trying to keep the code organized between all the different programmers that were working with you, and just like how did they facilitate the process to be better than the other companies you had worked for?
Well, I can there's let me think about this for a second here. Um, I think at Disney it went very well because I got to do things, at least from my perspective, because I got to implement some of the things the way that I wanted.
Yeah.
Everything was, in that case, it was a big project. There were tons of art resources from SGI workstations. Um, some of it was coming from cell animation, which is the same type of animation that's used on animated features, not the 3D ones, but the 2D
Yeah.
ones. And organizing it, even naming all the assets was a lot of work. But what we ended up doing there was an asset management system that they were looking at that was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what we ended up doing is we put everything into Visual Source Safe, which was the pretty much the cutting edge at the time. It's not really used, but we put everything into version control, all the art, all the 3D, everything, and organized it structurally so that well, this is a couple of things to talk about there. But as far as just storing and keeping versions, we use version control for absolutely everything. Documentation, everything came out of the art department, the sound department, all the code, even builds. Everything was version. It worked great. Um, the other thing is that I have a rule I follow. I try to implement anywhere I can, and that is that we use the same exact file hierarchy on everybody's machine, and so there's no surprises. You can have the root of the tree be anywhere you want, but if we go on to your machine or my machine and want to check on something or do a build or find an asset, it's in the same exact place. Likewise, all the build scripts have to work from any on anyone's machine. So if you pull the latest from version control, typically today everyone's using Git. I
Yeah.
still like Subversion. I think for a lot of things, it's Git is more complicated than it needs to be, even though it's very powerful. Um, if it builds on my machine, if we pull it down from version control and build it on your machine, it should produce exactly the same output.
Yeah.
And that's important because it's really one thing to develop a game. It's another thing to be able to ship it and be able to ship it, release it, and have everything be stable and do release it, updates and have a process in place. So, um, so those are some of the rules I use. If you want anything more specific, please ask. But those
Yeah.
things keep
No,
things
that's
simple.
good. Yeah. I'll have the more technical questions probably, so that's probably good.
Okay.
That was a pretty solid question and answer there. I like that.
Makes sense.
Like,
Do you want me to throw one out there now?
absolutely, Kat.
All right. This is a very broad question, but it's fine. At what point did you have your aha moment that let you know that this was a field you wanted to stay in?
Okay. So it'll take about 2 minutes for me to tell you how I got into games. I was programming CNC punch presses, and basically I was a machinist doing precision sheet metal and looking for a new challenge. But basically, I saw that there was software out there for doing CNC, and it was selling for $28,000 a seat. And I figured I've been using the software forever. I know exactly what it should do from a user's perspective. So I decided I was going to buy a computer, learn how to program, write my own software that was better from a user's perspective,
Very
and sell
nice.
mine for 15,000 instead of 28 and clean up. And then bought a computer, spent a year just learning about computers and software and everything else. And then my girlfriend at the time introduced me at a party to someone who owned Park Place Productions, the company
Ooh.
that did the first John Madden football on Sega Genesis. And he invited me to go up for a tour. And
Ooh,
so I
nice.
kind of, I didn't really know what that was about. I liked video games. But finally, I went on the tour, and about halfway through, I realized, hey, this is really cool. I want to do this. So I asked him, how do I get my foot in the door? And he said, if you want to work here, go out and buy a turbo assembler, learn assembly language, and then come back and talk to me. So he probably told 1,000 people that, but what I did
Nice.
was I went out and bought Turbo Assembler, and I got a book, and I started at page one. And like a month later, I called him back and said, "Okay, I learned it. Now what?" And eventually, I could give you the long story, but eventually, it got myself a chance, and I just
Yeah.
worked hard, and I just worked hard and stuck with it. And at one point, just prayed a lot and persevered and pushed through until I was in. So that was my aha moment, was actually during that tour where I thought, wow, this is really cool. And I
That's
haven't
really
turned, I
awesome.
just kept going. So,
That's actually
so
real. I
push
can
through.
understand. I can understand why that would be. I've never gotten the chance to explore like that, but I can see it because I worked for Blizzard for a little bit in the call center,
Yeah.
and when I walked into it wasn't at their main campus in California, it was at a side campus. But when I walked in, I was just like, this gaming thing is awesome. It didn't really spark it for me, or I wanted to get into it, but it definitely planted a seed. So something I think about every so often, like maybe, kind of do. So I get it. I get it. It's very cool.
One thing I might add in there, if I could,
Yep.
is that I got a chance to move from being a machinist to being an entry level programmer. Although the tasks they gave me weren't entry level, they're like, "Hey, go build this game." Um, but I got a chance to move over with close to the same amount of pay. And it's the point here is if you can get work in the same field that you want to be in, even if you have to take a small pay cut, do it, because then every day that you're spending your day mastering your craft rather than trying to do it on the side. So if you
Yeah.
have a choice,
That's some pretty solid
take
advice.
it.
Very nice. I like that. Take heart,
I'll have to
everyone.
remember that.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
that
Alright.
kind of went into one of my questions here about any type of advice that you would have for somebody trying to get their foot in the door. But I would like to expand upon that. If you had someone who was uh, had the desire to develop a game of their own, what kind of advice would you give them to start out with, uh, either technical or just personal in terms of any kind of perseverance that they may come into with their difficulties?
Okay, so the first thing is you said the word that's most important is persevere, because going from academic to real world programming, the biggest thing in programming is that there are times where you have something you have to solve, and there is no. I mean, the internet's great. You find all kinds of answers and people who've done it right or almost found the answer. But ultimately, you can get situations where you have a task you have to solve, and there really is nowhere you can go. There's no resource, no book. You just have to figure it out, and that may take you a day. It may take you 2 or 3 weeks, and you just have to have your mentality be where I'm going to get it. I'm just going to keep pushing through and pushing deeper until I find it. And you know, that's what sometimes being a good programmer, that's what it takes. Um, if as far as getting started, I would say um, there's a lot of resources you can read that can teach you. There are books on developing games, and they're going to get you in the ballpark, and they may not be the best way to do things, but they're going to educate you. They're going to show you one way to do everything. Learn those, and then ideas that you have, try them. If you think something can be done, and you think you can do it right now, then do it. And don't worry about if somebody says you can't. Just push through and do it. Um, I think a good place to start right now is the engine Unity 3D. It gives you a lot. It gives you a lot to start with. You're going to learn a lot more if you decide I'm going to just write a game from scratch in OpenGL or DirectX, uh, and you're going to learn a lot more because you're basically writing your own engine too. But it's a bigger task. It's probably better to start with Unity 3D, use C Sharp, not the JavaScript, and think of a game that you want to develop, hopefully not too ambitious for the very first one, and then write it, complete it, and for that matter, release it. Whether it sells well or not, it gives you the whole experience. Um, because, like I was saying earlier, it's one thing to develop a game, it's another thing to develop a game and finish it, polish it, and release it. And so if you can go through that whole process on a simple game, then you can raise the complexity. You can then change your focus to physics or um, uh, whatever you want. You can just focus special effects. Um, so, I mean, that's the short answer. I'd recommend for anyone who wants to be a programmer, I recommend that you do eventually learn C++ and learn assembly language. You may not use assembly language ever in your professional career, but it teaches you what the processor's actually doing behind the scenes when you're using the higher level languages. Um, if you want to get in somewhere today, you either come in with a degree and a, a good a recommendation, or you come in with a killer demo. So
Yeah.
one last thing to answer this is that anytime I'm trying to learn something new, whether it be physics or even schoolwork. Uh, I always try to I always try to focus on I always try to apply my research to something that I might actually use later. You know, like if I'm going to do physics, I'm going to be working on motocross physics, because while I'm learning physics, I'll be writing code that I might end up actually using in a product later on down the road. So
Yeah.
you don't just finish it up and say that was cool, I learned stuff, and then never touch it again.
Is it is
And
it is it safe to assume that motocross is your preferred leisure activity outside of your home?
Yes. I mean, there's a few.
So many cool points.
I mountain bike a lot, only
cool.
because, for one, it's almost as cool as motocross, uh, but it also is similar, and it gets me in shape. And also, but I get out, I ride motocross. I want to race again in a few months from now. I'm just getting myself in shape right now for it. But yeah, that's one of my passions. I'm into music. I'm starting to write music again,
Nice.
and support a very good friend who's an up and coming artist. Her
Excuse me.
band name is Prima Donna. Watch for her. She's beautiful. She's talented, and I'm doing what I can to help her get a start.
Very cool.
There we go.
I just wanted to go back on when you said learning assembly might not be quite as useful, but it's one of the ones you suggested. I
Yes.
know that right now I need to get around to writing my dadgum cover letter, but Curse is hiring for people that know assembly well. And I mean, I've taken a class in it, so I have an okay grounding in it. But because they need people for like their software called Curse Voice, they need people that can look at the assembly language that the games use so that they can integrate
Right.
their software to work with the game on that level. Because obviously they can't modify the actual game files, but they can modify when it's going into the assembly code to start running on the stuff. So like assembly's still being used by big companies like Curse and stuff to do really cool things like Curse Voice.
Very
Yeah.
nice.
Well, I
I
mean,
didn't even know that.
ultimately,
That's cool.
it's really hard to. At one point, you would all party. Actually, my first games were all assembly language, either 68,000 on the Sega Genesis or x86 on the PC, and all the tools, everything was written in assembly, because you're dealing with your processor was running in the megahertz, not
Yeah,
the hertz. So it
you
was
had to
more
be that
important.
efficient.
But then when you have multiple cores and you have processors that can do more than one instruction, can execute more than one instruction at a time, it becomes really, really difficult to hand optimize. But and it's less and less important. But my point with learning assembly is, whether you get employed with assembly or not, it's just the knowledge you get. I mean, when I'm writing in C++, I'm thinking about what the code that's going to be generated is like. It'll make you a better programmer. That's my point.
Definitely.
Very, very nice. This is such an
All right.
amazing learning experience so far. I'm seriously enjoying this already.
Kat, would you like to ask him another question?
Yeah, sure.
list? I'm sure you've got one or two that would fit right there.
I don't know if it would fit, but okay, it kind of does. If you had to choose just one programming language to use from here on out for the remainder of your career, which one would it be and why? If you could just use one.
That's easy. C++.
Nice. Why?
Because ultimately it is it's a high level language, but it's the most powerful out of. I mean, there are some newer languages I'm not familiar with, but ultimately you're controlling memory management, you're controlling everything, and the code that's generated from it is very, very fast. Can't tell you the differences between that and maybe Java, but it's something like at least 6 to 1 or something like that. Um, it's it's very, very fast. It's very, very powerful, and you know, it's a little bit harder. You have to manage your own memory and keep track of freeing memory you allocate. But that's just rules. you set up rules for yourself, and that becomes a non-issue. But it is the most powerful, and it is the language that's used on literally all console games. They may use
Very
Lua
cool.
or something for scripting, but there's a reason why console games are written in C++, and or C. I mean, it took a long time for the community to move away from C into C++, because there were perceived performance differences. But ultimately, whatever differences there are very minor, and the organization you have is much, much better. So that's an easy one for me.
Very
Uh,
cool.
Quick, small
Awesome.
technical question to ask you about the perceived difference, since I'm assuming that you were there during the shift, right? Like, were you
Yes.
program? Was the perceived performance difference because C sort of forces more elegance since it's not object based, it causes more recursion, or is it just because it was object oriented to functional to object oriented switch there?
I think most of it was there were slow perceived there were assumptions that were incorrect, for one, and also the paradigm shift, because C++ is quite a different language if you're not writing
Yeah.
object-oriented C. For me, it was natural because I worked for a company that wanted to stay with C. We moved to C++, but all the APIs had to stay in C. But yet the engine had to go from something that would run a very a game that had minimal requirements to doing uh, a football game that had to run, at a good frame rate on a 486 running Windows 95.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so what I did is I wrote there. I was writing object. I developed a system which I've been asked a few times to write a paper on, of object-oriented C development. So
Ooh,
all my
yeah, that
code
would
in
be
C
different.
was object-oriented for probably 2 or 3 years before I started C++.
So
And then
C had support for object oriented programming in it?
object-oriented programming is a paradigm. You
Oh,
can do it
true.
in any language. At minimum, you really need arrays for
Okay.
storing data, but ultimately, I have an object-oriented methodology for C that works pretty well. It worked well for a few projects for me.
Okay.
And you can do that with scripting languages. Most of the scripting languages today support object-oriented programming, but you don't have to. You can roll your own. It's a paradigm, and
Okay.
um, so that was the one thing. And the other thing is the perceived difference in performance, where there were benchmarks that showed that C++ had some minor differences in performance. But as one of my friends made the point, is that where you see those uh, where you see that logic that would maybe cause it to be a little bit slower, you'd have to write more code in C, and that code in C would take the same amount of time.
Okay.
So that's the first thing, and that was just going from using structures to using classes. But above that, sorry, give me a second here.
It's all good.
Lost my point. Oh yes, there's a misconception that templates are slow. Like, you've seen templates in C++,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
I've seen programmers who are very, very smart, can have done amazing things with graphics and whatnot, that will make the statement that templates are slow. But the truth is, templates are fast, because even though in your code you may um, pass different types into your template classes, the
Yeah.
compiler actually generates custom code for every single type that is passed through that template. And so it's actually very, very fast.
Okay, that
Very
makes
cool.
sense.
And
That is
that's a
actually
big
really
misconception. So today everyone writes in C++. It's
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've been hearing in all my classes is like C++, you need to make sure you have your grounding in it to get a
neat.
job.
Very
Chat.
solid
Let's
answer.
move. Let's move into some of the questions we've gotten from chat here. We've got
Okay.
a few in chat. We've also got some more popping up right now. Of course, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in chat. I know several people are there. Also,
Have you been saving them? Because
I have been. I have been.
Okay, good.
Also, you can go post over on the Gaming Tribe site and just make sure that somehow I'm tagged so I can see it.
Or me.
I've got one that's just kind of off the wall, but that I really like it. Steven San Marco asked over on the GT site, how did you get started with computers, and was there any connection between TV shows such as Sci-Fi that got you interested at all?
Awesome. I like that.
No connection from sci-fi that got me interested. Although I think the future is going to be amazing for us. It's going to be very cool